This video continues from the previous. Minimalism. I think most people understand what minimalism is, right? It's about the bare minimum necessary to do good design. And that is a huge source of debate. It's also way harder than most people think it is. And the key to it, though, is that you apply the principles and elements of design, and that solves any issue with it that might come from trying to make something work off grid or without consideration of the elements in design. And it's because you have so few elements in the design that it's imperative that they all work together. Let's take a look. I've got nothing but houses here for you. This is minimalism, right? We have stripped this down to its bare essentials, but we've still made it beautiful. And we've done that with the principles and elements of design. This used to be called Niederoy. I think it was a residence, and then they turned it into a museum. Pretty interesting, huh? I think it's cool. Surrealism. So essentially, it started off as a writer, Andre Breton. Started off with the style, but then it moved into art, and it evolved out of Dadaism. So you'll often see Dada and art move together. And Dada was not, unlike Dada, surrealism was not meant to be anti-art nor political at all. It was very much meant to be art. So they essentially, one of the main influences was for Sigmund Freud's interpretation of dreams. And so they used his interpretation of dreams. There's a lot of symbolism in that book. And they used the symbolism from that, dreams, hallucinations, random images, to create visuals based on that symbology. And so that's why when you look at surrealistic art, that's why you're going to see a lot of symbolism. You're going to okay, so why is there a turtle in this painting? Well, go look up the symbology of what does a turtle represent, or how is a turtle interpreted in Sigmund Freud's dream books, and that's probably why it's there. The cool thing about surrealism is by using that reference as a guide, it's the same as using a grid. You know you have a plan, and it makes it a lot easier to work with. So I don't know if you guys can see this. This is called the Hallucinogenic Toreador by Salvador Dali. And there is a face. There's a toreador in the painting. And this is his eye, which is also the face of the Venus de Milo. His left eye, or his right eye, but on our left. His other eye. His nose, which is her breast. And then her abs is his mouth, chin. Here's his tie. And then here's the bowl down here. And so you see a lot of flies. And flies are part of the symbology, right? So you're like, why flies? Well, there you go, right? So, and it's part of that. Well, flies represent death, decay, right? Because flies come whenever things are decaying and dead. And, unfortunately, very sadly, bullfighting, which Salvador Dali was against, the bulls are often killed. And the flies sort of represent that. It can also represent other things. But that explains why he puts what seem to be random objects in his work. But he's just a genius. I mean, this is incredible work of art. There's also a little boy down here. And then this is his wife, and he put her in every painting. Her name's Gala. And so here's another one by Dali, and he literally named this painting after one of Nietzsche's works. Thus spoke Zarathustra. Thrustra, I think, is it that right? And so this was his breaking away from religion. And so it's meant to be mocking of, some of the religious beliefs. And one of those, as you see here, God's holding cherries, and it's blatantly meant to be phallic, which, there was a period of time where all the Greek and Roman sculptures, the church went and covered the privates of all of those sculptures with fig leaves. And so here he's mocking it. And so that's sort of where he was inspired by this work, or the painting was inspired by the work of Nietzsche. There's surrealistic film, right? This is very clearly, surrealism always is like all the elements are real, but they don't belong together. And there's surreal architecture. Not a lot of it. It was very, very limited when I started looking for surreal architecture. But this is a Mae West, right? And you can see the painting looks like an eye. And this painting also looks like an eye. And then they arranged the table with the clock on it to look like the nose, and the sofa is the lips, and then curtains around it were the hair. And you can see here's the floor plan of how they did it. This, by the way, is how they do sidewalk chalk art, where you can only see it from one perspective. If you move, it gets distorted. But there you go. So interior design, interior surrealism. Abstract expressionism. Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko are the most well-known. And as we have talked about, Jackson Pollock truly is one of the most underappreciated artists, because if you ever see one of his works in person, it's thick in layers, and it's just really beautiful. And so when you look at it and you now understand what the elements of art are, and will soon understand in more detail what the principles are, you'll understand he followed it. He followed it. And it's just, if you start letting your eye follow the leading lines, which are true literal lines around the page, you start to see this vast imaginary city or network, and you start to see more color and more depth. And it takes a few minutes to really start to appreciate and see the beauty in his work. And I get it. I started off thinking, what's that? And then, of course, I started studying art. I have a AFA that I got first. And I began to understand that this is good. This is exactly what we do as artists. We challenge people. I'm not saying we do it with our work that we get paid for, but it's just, it's something that we do. And then so we zoomed in on this one, and you can see up close, you can see what I'm talking about, but there's real texture to this. There's not only visual texture to his work, but there's actual texture. And of course, there's no recognizable subject. And he didn't start out this way. If you can look, you can Google his early works. He painted, normally. He learned the principles of elements of design, and then he broke away and he did his own thing. And now we're talking about him decades later. This is an abstract expressionist building. I did not know one existed. Here you go. It's in Australia. Pop art. Pop art was meant to mock consumerism. And it ended up becoming the very thing that it was meaning to oppose. It's still among us. Let's look at Andy Warhol, the father of pop art. He was showing mass production. So he took this picture of Mao Zedong and colored it multiple different ways and put it in a row to show, like, mocking the mass production. But it was good because he applied the principles and elements of design, and so it caught on. And it's a movement that's still with us. Richard Hamilton, pop artist, wrote, "Parthenon, Picasso, or Polynesian maiden are reduced to the same kind of cliche by the syntax of the print. Reproducing a Liechtenstein is like throwing a fish back into water." Basically he's saying the best thing about pop art was that it was art. And here you go, pop art in architecture. You'll see a lot of stuff like this in Europe that I mean, you see some stuff here, but for the most part, see stuff like this, you got to go to Europe. And then, so here's a list of modern styles. We didn't talk about Art Nouveau. Why did we not talk about Art Nouveau? Anyway, we didn't. We just talked about these things. But here's a list. If you want more, these are all clickable links that you have. I believe they're clickable links. Oh, maybe they're not. Oh, sorry about that. I thought this was I guess I just underlined them. All right, well, you can obviously, if you want to know more, you can copy and paste them. But we will look at them in much more depth once we get to, I think it's 1210, where we actually study the history of residential architecture. I've done both. I've done commercial architecture and residential architecture. I've studied both. I sometimes find them hard to completely separate from each other. So while that class will primarily focus on styles in residential architecture, we'll look at some things that aren't, because in our current world, there are towers that are residential buildings that are also made of the same stuff as commercial architecture. So here's an example, right? This is a residential tower that is also a model. And it looks out of scale. So you see how the size of a window on this building, that's a photograph, and then you compare it to this. That looks massive. Okay, so in conclusion, this is an overview of the different ways that a designer can shape your work to have the greatest impact on your audience. As always, remember that rules are eventually meant to be broken. But first you have to understand them. First you have to learn them. And so that's why we're spending so much time devoted to them. Because once you understand them, then you'll know how to break them correctly. And I have seen people's work who try to break them too soon. Yeah, and it's not good design. So be patient with yourself. Get to know what these things are. Work with these things. Get to understand them. Learn how to ride the bike before you try to ride the unicycle. And so once you've mastered them, you're going to develop your own style for your own structures. And eventually your style will be sought by people who want your style. And then I've listed references here. Okay, I'm going to end this here. And in the next video, we're going to look at some documents to show structure.